Rock and roll. All right, welcome everybody to our second TagOne webinar. We're going to cover a fascinating topic. Apparently it's fascinating everybody else too, because we've got a huge audience today. We're going to talk about the current hemp and CBD landscape and how you guys can DeRisk it with your supply chain. Overall, we're going to talk about what motivates this. So TagOne is committed to helping natural products companies build in transparency into their supply chain, and of course that helps build customer trust, improve operational efficiency, and of course reduce risk. And there's nobody better to have with us than Neil. Neil and I met at the CWCB conference, and he's been doing this for a handful of years as a cannabis law specialist at Wilson Elser, which is a national law firm that has customers all over the country, and has Neil shared with me before that a handful of his colleagues have been doing this since the inception for 10 years, who've taken him under his wing. But Neil's at a table. He's always looking like a friendly face. I'm always looking for somebody to talk to because of my father's son, and we struck up a conversation. And Neil, I'm happy to have you here with us today, buddy.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to it a lot.
I'm Joe Witte, VP of Partnerships and Ecosystems from TagOne. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do in a little bit, but Neil shared this slide with us before, and I think this really illustrates a lot of the kind of the, I don't want to say it's pain, but just the back and forth that's occurring between all the different stakeholders in the industry. We look at this rope. I'm sure it's a hemp rope. It's to some degree just how tangled this can be. And so we're going to cover a lot of these different strains that are occurring between state and federal policies, how they conflict, what are some of the major risks occurring with state, FDA, class action, what you can sell, what you can't, labeling, how to protect yourself, how supply chain fits into this and the impact on risk, and of course provide how technology and blockchain can help source the science, track the source, science, safety, to keep you guys all out of trouble. And like I said, hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. So real quick, I'm going to launch a quick poll. You should, I'm going to push that out now. If you click on polls, there should be one that you can view on the left and answer, which was what role, just of who's in the room, what role does your business play in the hemp and CBD industry? And hopefully it works. I kind of messed this up a little bit before I launched it to test it. So it says view result. But if you want to click on that real quick on the first poll and answer that, I'll try to do my best to give you guys a response there. In the meantime, while we're doing that, see if we got a result. All right, so we've got quick breakdown. About half the attendees are service providers, insurance, legal, 20%, brand, retail, manufacturers make up close to 10%, processors, ingredient providers around 10%, and growers 10%. So 20, 30, 40. So it's almost 50-50 between people who are working in this industry and people who are serving the industry, which is interesting. So again, it's great to have everybody with us. So Neil, we're talking about a big industry here, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of growth. We're already at close to $2 billion, and it's not even completely legal in every state, or clearly legal, and expected to be $16 billion by 2025. The whole dietary supplement industry, some people project, is around $80 billion, and so that's, if my math is correct, almost a fifth of that in a handful of years. So that probably explains why there's a lot of people joining us today. And we look at this map, we see that it's convoluted. There's a lot of different colors here, right? So tell us a little bit about how this creates different challenges with these states having different policies and different rules in our country right now.
Sure. So this map shows what states have recreational marijuana programs, medical marijuana programs that are CBD only, and what states only have a hemp pilot program. This is marijuana generally, not specific to hemp and CBD. And just by looking at this, you can see the variety of laws and regulations states have with cannabis, marijuana in general. So if you're operating in the space, in the hemp CBD space, in the cannabis space, there are a myriad of regulations to follow, and especially in the marijuana space. You're operating under state law only, and under the guise that it's an illegal controlled substance under federal law. So the risks are there, and it's just critically important to be in compliance with the various state laws that you're operating in. The next slide that Joe's gonna show is a breakdown of states that have specific CBD, hemp-derived CBD rules. States that where almost all types of products are permissible, so long as they follow certain testing, labeling, and sourcing requirements. There's other states that have rules permitting certain CBD products, but don't permit other CBD products. For example, New York, while it has a pretty robust hemp program, only permits CBD products to be sold as dietary supplements, so long as the products are manufactured using in a GMP certified facility. States are all over the map when it comes to hemp-derived CBD. There's over almost half states don't even have CBD regulations. There's still a small handful of states where hemp is a controlled substance. It's not differentiated than marijuana. Yep. The regulations are all over the place, and as we walk through the presentation today, we'll get into some more detail about federal regulations, various state regulations, and how different state and federal agencies come into play, and risks that operators in the industry need to be aware of.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just assumed, hey, like before I started learning about what's happening in the industry, that CBD comes from hemp's legalized from the Farm Bill, it should be all good to go. But that's not clearly the case, as we're going to learn. And we see there's a lot of key players in here. The USDA, FDA, the different states have their own laws, and then you get lawyers involved. No offense, Neil, and some of the civil and class action lawsuits, and we live in a very tortious country with consumers. And then, of course, when I say you, I'm talking about the growers, the providers out there, and your supply chain and the impact. So real quick, I'm going to launch another poll, which is, what do you guys think is your greatest risk at this point in time? As you guys are, and if you have a client, let's say in your insurance company or a law firm, where do you guys feel is the greatest risk? So while we're answering that, Neil, talk to us about the USDA and their role in this whole field of hemp and CBD.
Sure. So the USDA came into the hemp space in a heavy way after the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. What the 2018 Farm Bill did was change the definition of marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act. And it declared that the buds, leaves, and germinating seeds of a cannabis plant and the substances extracted therefrom are no longer considered marijuana, so long as they contain no more than a 0.3% THC concentration on a dry weight basis. So essentially creates a federal definition for hemp and excludes hemp from the definition of marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act. Now that the 2018 Farm Bill legalizes hemp, it gave authority to the U.S. Department of Agriculture to promulgate rules governing the growing of hemp. So the Farm Bill says the USDA has to, one, promulgate their own rules for growing hemp across the country, and then it gives the states the option to submit their own states' rules to the USDA for approval if states want to regulate it on their own. So currently, the USDA has not come out with their rules on a national level, and the USDA said they're not going to be approving state rules until their own rules are out. States that want to have a hemp program but don't want to go through with writing their own rules can default to the USDA rules for growing hemp.
Okay.
So the USDA is going to have a huge oversight authority on growing hemp in this country moving forward.
Of course, right. That's true. That makes sense, right? Like our federal government's going to get involved, and they're still figuring out what the policy is going to be. Next, we're going to talk about the FDA. Before we do, let me give a quick result from the poll, which is 48% of the audience felt that the FDA was the greatest risk for CBD hemp companies. 8% said USDA. 14% said civil lawsuit class action. 17% said state law enforcement, and 10% said internal operations issues, which is implosion. Hey, your stuff just gets cloudy and messy, and you can't run your business. So after we run through yours, I'd love to get your perspective on kind of towards the end of your portion, Neil, and what you think the biggest risk is.
Sure.
So let's talk about the FDA, since everybody is like, that seems to be potentially one of the scariest areas for people at this time. What role are they playing now? What kind of what's their current status?
Right. So one of the biggest misconceptions to come out of the Farm Bill was that the Farm Bill legalized CBD. That is incorrect. While the Farm Bill removed hemp from the Controlled Substances Act and extractions like CBD from the Controlled Substances Act, it explicitly left authority to the FDA to regulate any hemp products that are being inserted into foods or marketed as dietary supplements and sold as drugs. The FDA has authority under the Federal Drug and Cosmetic Act, the FDAC, to regulate the food source in this country and to regulate drugs in this country. Because CBD is an active ingredient in an FDA-approved drug, Epidiolex, the FDA is under the opinion that CBD cannot be added to foods or beverages. It is not the dietary supplement, and it can't be marketed as a drug unless it goes through the investigatory new drug application process, that lengthy FDA approval process. The FDA has been, so far, the chief federal agency that regulates CBD products, and just as recently as 2 weeks ago, they sent a warning letter to Curaleaf, which is a large publicly traded international cannabis company that also has a hemp line. And I think this warning letter to Curaleaf encapsulates the FDA's oversight of the industry, how it's been regulating the industry over the last few years. And while the FDA seems to be the policeman of the industry on a federal level, they really haven't done much over the past 4 years other than sending warning letters to companies for making impermissible claims or for making outlandish health claims like our CBD products can help cure cancer, can help with Alzheimer's, yada yada yada. Those are the types of claims the FDA is concerned about. But again, they really haven't done anything other than send out these warning letters to companies over the past 4 years. They sent out a couple dozen warning letters, and that's it. There are thousands of operators in the CBD space, and again, only a couple dozen have gotten warning letters since 2015.
So is that because, hey, one, they're limited with their manpower, right? Like they only have so many people that can go out there of keep companies that are launching, and probably they just don't know yet either, right? They want to overextend their reach, what is their authority to enforce these, and it could some of the challenge be too that just the potential risk for injury or death with CBD is minimal. Like, what's your take on why they're not coming down hard on companies?
That's a great question, and really that's anyone's guess. I mean, this industry over the past year has exploded, especially since the passage of the Farm Bill, 7 months ago. It has just exploded, and the FDA is grappling with how to best regulate it. So they're certainly concerned with health risks associated with CBD products, and there's not much information known currently about long-term exposure to CBD, and that's one of the reasons why the FDA held a public hearing on May 31st, just a couple of months ago, to discuss the risks of CBD, to discuss pathways to regulate the industry. It was a widely attended meeting. I think there was 44,000 plus comments, maybe 5,000 plus comments submitted to the FDA from industry members, and the meeting was really to explore how, in light of the quite possibly already billion-dollar industry, how to regulate this, how to rein in some companies, how to create a safe environment for consumers. What levels of CBD are safe, what levels of CBD are dangerous, and there was a lot of great information discussed, a lot of fantastic comments submitted. My firm is a member of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and Ian Stewart, who's the chair of our cannabis group, and I helped draft comments for the NCIA to submit to the FDA for this hearing. And the goal of the hearing was for the FDA to obtain scientific data and other information related to cannabis and cannabis-derived compounds from both botanical and synthetic sources to inform FDA's regulatory oversight on these products. The three topics discussed at the hearing were health and safety, manufacturing, product quality, and marketing, labeling, and sales. And again, the big concern is consumer safety for the FDA, and their chief worry is a lot of these CBD companies out there today are making outlandish, impermissible health claims. So they're worried that consumers are going to be using these CBD products to help with serious diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's, and they're going to, by using these products, they're going to forego, FDA-approved drugs that actually work and help. So that's something that's the FDA is very concerned about. They want to minimize that. But again, they recognize that this is a billion-dollar industry. It's growing every day, and they've got to create some sort of regulatory pathway to help get CBD out of this gray area.
I mean, they're trying to grab the tiger by its tail, and
that's exactly
of
right.
course, do their job and yet not restrict the growth. But in reality, I think we've often looked at CBD as a super drug and hemp as kind of the next great thing in agriculture. But there's some challenges with CBD too, right? That you're aware of that I think anybody who's going to market it or sell it needs to be aware of. Talk a little bit about those and how they've popped up and something that people need to be aware of.
Sure. So there have been some studies that show there are health risks with long-term exposure to CBD. There's some drug interactions that CBD interferes with. One of the studies cited by the FDA in their notice for public comment was a study that Epidiolex submitted, that the GW Pharmaceuticals submitted during its application to get Epidiolex approved, and the study that showed long-term exposure to CBD in high doses has some effect on your liver. The question the FDA wants to figure out is, well, how much? How much CBD can affect your liver? Is it if you take a couple of drops from your CBD tincture in the morning and have your CBD seltzer for lunch and then have CBD gummies for dessert every day over 10 years, is that enough? I don't know. The studies need to companies need to start studying this a little bit more to figure out what type of health risks are associated with long-term exposure.
And it's going to take time, right? Like, why can one person eat peanuts, another person can't? Why can some person drink Coke 3 times a day, have no issues, another person has one more day and get diabetes? So I imagine this is going to take time to shake out and take some real studies to occur to figure out what the issues are. But as anybody marketing the product just needs to be aware that, hey, somebody could have a reaction or an incident that they need to be prepared for. And so knowing this is a new industry, people are excited and cranking out products really fast. There's some big companies that are prepared for this kind of legal process. They know everything to go through, but smaller companies that are rolling it out, what are some of the caution areas that companies can get themselves into trouble with as they're rolling out new products and putting them on the shelves?
Right. That's a great question. This kind of ties in to Joe's poll a little bit earlier. So in my mind, the biggest risk for operators in the hemp CBD space is civil tort exposure. This is a billion-dollar industry. It's expected to be up to $16 billion by 2025. There is real money here. Because there's real money here, plaintiffs' attorneys are just chomping at the bits to go after companies that are making impermissible claims, that are marketing their products as THC free when in fact they have a low amount of THC, but enough for individuals who take them to failed drug tests. Some companies are making health claims and marketing their CBD products as drugs, but they haven't been approved by the FDA for drugs. So there's a handful of state statutes that say if you market a product as a drug and it hasn't been approved by the FDA, then potential plaintiffs can bring a claim against your company. So a lot of uninformed companies are making these claims. They're putting these types of claims on their labels. They're packaging their advertising, and we're starting to see lawsuits pop up. There's been a handful of class action lawsuits. One, which we'll talk about a little bit later, in California against Koi CBD. It's a big company. So manufacturers and brands in the space need to be very, very careful about what they're putting on their labels, what they're putting on their websites, the links on their websites, the claims they're making. And again, no one really knows what the long-term effects of CBD are. In 15 years from now, there could be a study that comes out or investigation that comes out that shows CBD has some serious effects, and no one really knows what that is yet. So it's critical for companies not to be making these claims, to be putting warnings on their products that to the effect that this isn't an FDA-approved product. There could be risks, just unknown risks. So again, I really see the civil tort exposure as being a huge risk for the industry that a lot of operators, especially new operators who just are trying to cash in on the popularity of CBD, that are just ignoring.
Yep, and so I know you're going to talk a second about labeling, but I felt the same way. I know that most people thought the FDA was the biggest risk, but to me, I actually know a couple of guys who are class action lawsuit attorneys and say, hey, the FDA may write a letter and tell you to fix something, and unless it's egregious or you just are a masochist, you'll fix it, right? And then they'll probably leave you alone and maybe do some audits, and the audits can be a little painful and frustrating and not much fun. Whereas a class action lawsuit, the motivation is we're here to get money from you, and we're here to get a lot of money from you. And those attorneys know all too well, once they find one flaw in one business, they're going to codify that and find everybody else that's doing the same thing and go out there. I've heard on the nutraceutical side, good companies that do things the right way have dealt with $2 million class action lawsuits. I see that as the biggest risk, because there's somebody's making money versus somebody's just trying to correct something. Talking about the labeling side, what businesses need to be aware of in order to protect themselves.
So there's a lot of tension over labeling of CBD products. Companies have to consider, one, that the FDA essentially has a prohibition on CBD products that are marketed as dietary supplements and CBD and products that have CBD added to them that are foods and beverages. So companies have to operate with that understanding in mind. States are coming out with their own labeling and testing requirements that are very stringent and are mirroring adult use cannabis and medical cannabis regulations. So operators need to be cognizant of state regulation in each state that they're selling their product in. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. I'll give an overview about examples of what types of requirements different states have. I guess now might be a good place for that too. So Indiana was really the first state that came out with a robust labeling requirement for CBD products. Indiana permits what they call low THC hemp extracts to be sold in the state. So long as the labeling or packaging contains a handful of requirements, like a QR code that contains your batch identification number, a product number, a batch date, an expiration date, the ingredients used, and then in addition to that QR code that has that information, the label or package itself has to have the batch number on it, the expiration date of the product on it, the number of milligrams of the hemp extract on it, and the name and location of the manufacturer. Florida and Texas both very recently passed hemp statutes that overhauled their hemp programs and explicitly permit hemp extract products, but they also contain very specific labeling and testing requirements. In Texas, for example, again, the package must have a batch identification number on it, the batch date, the product name, a URL link to a certificate of analysis for the product, and a certification that a THC concentration of the product is not more than 0.3%. And before a consumable hemp product is sold at retail in Texas, a sample representing the hemp product must be tested, by a lab, by an accredited lab, for the THC content, and also to determine that the product does not contain, excessive amounts of heavy metals, pesticides, harmful microorganisms, and other chemicals that could harm consumers. Utah is another state with a very robust structure for their hemp products. In Utah, manufacturers that want to sell their product in the state have to register the product with the state first. So that's a requirement in addition to, again, strict labeling and testing requirements. So these requirements are all over the map. Every state is different. Some states don't have requirements. Other states require the products to be sold as dietary supplements. But again, that's all in contradiction of federal law, of what the FDA says. So it's important to be cognizant of the tension between federal and state law and to understand what the risks are and how to best minimize your risk.
Yeah, I think you framed it really well, and we're going to dive a little bit more of that later as we get into some of the supply chain components on it. But another area that's a challenge are claims, right? So, I mean,
Absolutely.
Hey, any good marketer says, all right, we've got a product, here's how it's going to help you. But that makes it a bit of a marketing challenge if you're making certain claims. Talk about where companies need to be careful when they're making claims.
Yeah, so this is a perfect slide to talk about the recent FDA warning letter to Curaleaf. The emphasis in that letter was on Curaleaf's impermissible health claims. But if you're marketing a product by saying, if you're marketing a product that makes these health claims, like, for example, Curaleaf made claims that their CBD disposable vape pens can be used for chronic pain to soothe chronic pain, or their tincture is a soothing tincture for chronic pain. If you're saying that these products affect the structure of a consumer's body, then they're a drug, according to the FDA, and they've got to go through the FDA drug approval process. They're considered new drugs, and new drugs may not be legally introduced or delivered for the introduction to interstate commerce without prior approval from the FDA. So companies have to be very careful about making even innocuous claims like the CBD lotion relieves pain, or this CBD oil can help put you through a restful night's sleep. That can be construed as marketing your product as a new drug, and almost always these companies haven't gone through the new drug approval process, and so that's a problem.
That makes it tough, right? So what are ways that companies can, I don't want to say circumvent, but say legally comply and still, and you see it sometimes in product names, like, hey, it's called, it's like sleep mode. Well, I'd assume that they're just going to help you with sleep, and it has something in it. Well, what are ways that people can kind of get around that legally? I know that you want to be careful here, but what would a company do?
Don't do it. I mean, my advice to a lot of my clients who are operating in the space are be very, very cognizant of the health claims that you're making. Even if you call your transdermal patch relief, and it contains hemp in it, that's the FDA could construe that as an impermissible health claim, and they could think that you're marketing your product as a drug, which is impermissible because you did not go through the right process is, and did not get approval from the FDA to market your product and sell your product as a drug. And not only does that open you up to regulatory exposure and fines, it also opens you up to civil and tort exposure. And this is a great transition into a recent complaint filed in California State Court in Los Angeles against Koi CBD. A couple of plaintiffs, sued Koi for exactly that, marketing their products as drugs, making these impermissible health claims, when in fact their product has not been approved as a drug by the FDA. California has a law called the Sherman Act, which prevents, which says a business practice is unlawful if it violates any established state or federal law. The Sherman Law prohibits the sale of any new drug without approval of a new drug application by the FDA. So the plaintiff's theory in this case is Koi is marketing their product as a drug. They're making these claims and they're marketing materials that it helps with Alzheimer's, it helps with cancer, it helps with insomnia. Therefore, it's a drug, and because it has not been approved by the FDA, they're selling this drug in violation of the Sherman Law. The complaint is almost 300 pages long, and the plaintiff's attorneys did a very, very thorough job of going through Koi's marketing materials on their websites. They discovered materials that Koi gave to retailers to help promote their brand, and a lot of the paragraphs and allegations in this complaint mimic FDA warning letter language. It was as simple as that. These attorneys looked at these FDA warning letters over the years. Again, like I said, there's been a couple dozen over throughout the past 4 years, and they said, "Oh, the FDA says CBD companies can't make health claims. Here's the language from a warning letter, but Koi is making these health claims, so therefore they're in violation of state law." Another allegation in this complaint is that Koi marketed its product as being THC free. And came subject to a random drug test at work and was subsequently fired from work. There's a nuance here in this specific lawsuit that I don't think this is a strong claim, but this very type of claim just survived summary judgment in another lawsuit in federal court in the Western District of New York. I think that case is called, hold on, give me 1 second.
While you're looking for that, I'm looking at this label, and there's a lot of claims here, right? I mean, asthma, cancer, well-being, whatever well-being means. Maybe you could say well-being, I don't know. Intestines, heart, eyes, brain, bone structure, like who wouldn't want this? I could see why this one specifically was targeted as a super drug that can't necessarily support that. And it looks like they put testimonials on their website, and there's some big no-nos when it comes to patient testimonials on your website too, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So when the FDA sends out warning letters, they've mentioned that they look at everything on a product's website. They'll look at links to blogs or links to external studies, and they'll use those and cite those as examples of companies making impermissible health claims. So one of the things they cited is testimonials about from consumers, anecdotal evidence that, I used your CBD product and it cured my fibromyalgia, my pain is finally bearable. Those two are a big no-no. That's a red flag for the FDA, and that's something similar to what Curaleaf got in trouble for. They had links on their website to blogs about the health benefits of CBD, and Curaleaf responded to the FDA last week and did a scrub of their website, took down all links that contain any sort of health claim. The other lawsuit I wanted to mention was Horn versus Medical Marijuana Inc. And again, there was the Western District of New York just decided a summary judgment motion, and a couple claims survived summary judgment and were permitted or now permitted to go to trial. And one of those claims is a fraudulent inducement claim under New York law, where the plaintiffs are claiming they used this hemp-derived CBD product because it says it had 0% THC. The plaintiff took the product and then was subject to a random drug test at work, failed the drug test.
Wow.
He didn't know why he failed the drug test. He claims he's not a marijuana user. Then he remembered that he used a CBD tincture from this company, so he concluded that it must have contained THC. So he went out, bought a bottle again, tested that new bottle, and it turned up positive for THC. Again, it was a minimal amount. It was hemp-derived CBD, but because hemp-derived CBD can contain up to 0.3% THC, it still has THC, and that could turn up positive on drug tests. So he was fired from work, and he brought a lawsuit, and that claim survived summary judgment and is heading to trial. A lot of companies are advertising on their bottles that their product is THC-free, and that is, again, very risky, because even though your product is derived from hemp, it still can contain up to 0.3% THC, and that's enough to turn a positive drug test.
And that'll cause issues, right? If you're being tested for that, for sure. So,
absolutely.
Those are great summaries. I know you're going to dive in a little bit more as we continue, but as we look at a handful of logos here, we see there's a lot of different people involved in the complexity of this business now that we just as business owners can't be hasty and moving and diving into this industry first, where we see a lot of money. We have to hire the right professionals in order to help us with this. And I think most, some of the companies we work with, when they hire people who've been doing this in pharmaceuticals or dietary supplements on the higher level, they have some awareness. They know the right questions to ask, and I think that's just going to be important to do. Something that ties it together between the legal risk, compliance, regulatory is supply chain. And when we broke down, looking at the complexity of the hemp CBD supply chain, like it can get pretty hairy from, where's the seed come from? Like, what kind of claims are you making? Is it organic? Is it non-GMO? Where is it harvested? Of course, does it come down to the state it's harvested? Where can it be distributed? Where's it processed? Are you pulling out CBD? What kind of claims are you making? It can get pretty hectic there. How does that, from a logistics perspective, that complexity, like what are some recent cases that have popped up that have caused some of those complications, and what are some best practices that companies need to be aware of when it comes to logistics?
Sure. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but there's been two major transportation related cases in federal court. I think that the most well known one is Big Sky Scientific versus Idaho State Police, where a shipment of hemp was being delivered via truck from Oregon down to Colorado. Was pulled over in Idaho, and Idaho police thought that the 7,000 pounds of hemp was marijuana. Idaho has a law. Idaho is a state that does not distinguish between hemp and marijuana, so anything that has any amount of THC is illegal, regardless if it was grown pursuant to a state-compliant hemp program. The police seized the truck, arrested the driver. 7,000 pounds of hemp, I think it was equivalent of over $1 million worth of hemp, and the hemp's gone. Wow. The Big Sky Scientific sued to have the Idaho State Police release the hemp back into their custody, but a federal court agreed with Idaho and said although the 2018 Farm Bill has a provision that says states cannot interfere with the interstate transportation and shipping of hemp, that only applies to hemp grown pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill. And because the USDA has not approved any state program, there has been no hemp in this country grown pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill. So therefore, even though this is hemp that was seized, it was not grown pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill, and this interstate shipping clause does not apply here. The Big Sky Scientific appealed to the Ninth Circuit. It's currently pending the Ninth Circuit. But in the meantime, the U.S. Department of Agriculture came out with an opinion which I expect to be pretty controlling over the Ninth Circuit in that case, and said, no, Idaho State Police and Mr. Federal Court Judge, you have this interpretation wrong. The interstate shipping provision of the 2018 Farm Bill applies to hemp grown under the 2014 Farm Bill and under the 2018 Farm Bill. So therefore, you cannot seize this shipment of hemp because it is hemp. It's not marijuana. So it's critical for companies who are shipping hemp across the country to make sure they have as much documentation in place as they can to show that their hemp is state compliant grown hemp. And they should have hemp license, a copy of the license of the for the grower in the state where it's going to process the hemp. They should have a copy of that company's license with them. They should have documentation showing the source of the hemp. And even though it's impermissible for states to interfere with interstate shipping of hemp, states are still doing it. I mean, local state police don't know the difference yet. They're not sophisticated enough to know the difference yet for the difference between hemp and marijuana.
Yeah, you were telling me before that I was asking the question, well, how's hemp look compared to cannabis? You said it looks pretty much the same, so it's almost understandable, right?
Sure.
The right documentation. Even then, local police officers maybe a little bit conservative, like say, well, I'm not going to take your word for it. So I imagine that can get a little hairy until that's squared away.
That's absolutely correct.
And in essence, like that's we built our technology in our company, and just to give a little bit of background on TagOne, we developed TagOne to be an integrated supply chain solution for natural products, and we weren't necessarily looking solely at hemp CBD, although that's an area that we certainly support. But we've been providing track and trace technology solutions for pharmaceutical companies like J&J, Roche, AmerisourceBergen for more than a decade. And we started to learn a couple things. One, that the supplement companies and now CBD hemp companies are faced with significant challenges. Sometimes it's around operational infrastructure. How do you track all this documentation and paperwork? How do you build trust with consumers to know what you say is in your products actually in your product? And then minimizing risk. But on top of that too, just to give a little bit of insight into what our vision is our co-founders, TJ and Manish, and even my family dealt with health issues, whether it was cancer or autoimmune disease. With what we realize we're putting in our bodies, we don't always know what we're putting in our bodies and what's making those claims. So how important we want to support companies that are built on transparency. And sometimes we all have different reasons for transparency. The reason for this webinar is about risk, how to keep ourselves out of trouble. And on the good side of the law and regulations, but also how do we build trust with consumers to say, hey, listen, this is what you're buying. This is why you want to buy me, because you know what's going to be inside there. So in essence, that's why we developed, using today's modern technology, cloud, mobile, and of course now blockchain, to help all of our customers effectively track lot numbers, who all your buyers are, how to minimize the risk of your suppliers and their approvals. And so we want to take a little closer look at that. Neil, happy to have you, because you're going to help give us some perspectives on the legal implications of how we help companies.
Sure.
So one, real quick, blockchain. It's a big buzz around there. People typically want to associate blockchain with Bitcoin. I could say that's not just what Bitcoin is. Think of blockchain as an immutable digital ledger, right? Where anytime you add data that's blockchain enabled, it's going to validate that. And the analogy I give is, imagine a Word document that somebody makes a change and it's redlined, but you can't change the red line, right? Anytime you add something else, it may add another color. So how does it work exactly? Listen, I'm not a tech guy. It's kind of like, how does the cloud work? We don't really know. It just works. Somebody a lot smarter, you can watch YouTube videos on exactly how blockchain works. Basically, in a nutshell, it's going to add, I think it's like a 27-digit various code. Anytime you change one piece of data, that code's going to change automatically. Now, also something to keep in mind with blockchain is there are different, like you have a private blockchain, which TagOne uses, which means, listen, only if you share your information with somebody can they view it. It's not out on the public. And you do have public blockchains like Bitcoin and other solutions that are out there. But it works really well for logistics and supply chain to know, hey, you sent this, I received it. Now we can validate and track that. So how's it going to help this industry, and how's it going to help consumers? For one, it's just going to drive increased accountability and transparency in these transactions. Audits are painful. It's just going to build a credible audit trail. Validate products, what claims, like what is in, if you have a blend, what's in your products, and building trust again with consumers and regulators so people know the source, science, safety, and you have sustainable practices of what's in your product. So real quick look at this graphic, which is a combination that shows, imagine those little folders at the bottom are bits of data and all the different information that's passed in this complex supply chain from the grower, processor, there's an importer, it could be state, or certainly international, manufacturer, consumer. There's supply chain's complex. So that's where we came in, is in order to help our customers track all that information. Oftentimes it gets lost because people are using spreadsheets or an ERP that isn't built to manage all this information, or an accounting system, and you lose track of, hey, all these lot numbers came in, it was transformed. What happened to it next? And so one thing that we want to do is we have three different components of our technology. One is something we call TagOne Harvest. How can you capture key information at the crop level or the seed level, using mobile devices to kind of pull that in and enable the farmers and harvesters to make their life a whole lot easier. Kind of our third section, I'm kind of jumping. We're going to come back to the middle one in a second, this TagOne Connect. And this is important. I'd love to get your perspective, Neil, too, like using QR codes. So if I'm a consumer and I would say, hey, what's the source, science, and safety of this product? Let me scan this on a QR code. You touched a little bit before about some of the requirements that states are having with QR codes. How important can this be for companies that are in the cannabis or hemp space to have QR codes on their consumer products?
So I think it's critical. As more and more states come online and release regulations governing CBD products, each state is now requiring a QR code that links to specific material, including the certificate of analysis for the hemp product. So it's essential. If companies want to start building national brands, it's essential that they have QR codes on their products. Not only is it essential for companies to comply with state regulations, but also just consumer transparency. CBD is quickly becoming a health and wellness product, and health and wellness consumers live and die by transparency. They require transparency on the products that they're purchasing, knowing exactly what's in it, where it came from, and everything in between. So, from a regulatory standpoint and a regular business standpoint, it's essential to have QR codes that link to this type of information.
Yeah, so I mean, it was kind of interesting that our team had the vision of this, what we call end-to-end traceability, or in this industry, seed to shelf. Kind of the middle part of our platform, TagOne Enterprise, because it's not mobile, people feel like, oh, maybe it's not quite the sexiest part, but I could tell you this is the meat and kind of where the magic happens, where in essence we're going to be tracking kind of the data, documentation, transactions, recalls, returns, and have the ultimate analysis and data analytics for our clients. So one thing that, we often don't think a lot about, which is master data, right? Like, data, put me to sleep right away. But knowing who your suppliers are and if they've gone through approvals is really important, right? Especially as people are moving fast. Like, hey, we ran out of this product. Let's just order from so-and-so. Neil, talk a little bit about the importance of approved suppliers and how, if they're not approved, that can get companies in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most critical aspects for any CBD company to be aware of and cognizant of is the source of the CBD that they're purchasing. A lot of manufacturers, processors, and brands don't grow their own hemp, and they're purchasing CBD crude oil or biomass in bulk. So it's absolutely critical that they can validate the source of that CBD. It has to be purchased from a licensed grower, a company that has a license in a state to grow hemp, and they've got to make sure that the hemp is grown in compliance with that, with those state regulations and soon to be USDA regulations. So this is it's absolutely critical, because if they unknowingly buy what they think is hemp that wasn't grown by a licensed grower, then that's marijuana. They're quickly doing something legal and changing into something very, very illegal that they can get in a lot of hot water with.
Sure.
So it's a must.
And so, that's where our system comes into play, is to create the right approval process and workflows to make sure corners aren't cut and companies don't get in trouble by something is what you'd think is as simple as just adding a new supplier. And another component of that is documentation. And anytime that people are putting things in or on their body, we have to have all the right C of A's available, approvals for their suppliers, and the testing of individual ingredients. And our platform helps with a lot of that documentation component to, if there's certain claims, is it organic? Is it, of course, this isn't necessarily kosher, or is it, what are certain allergens or non-GMO? What are some areas that you've seen or that are really important for companies to have when it comes to documentation, Neil?
So one of the big things with documentation is not only do they need documentation to comply with state and some federal law, there's good documentation. So given the risk of civil lawsuits, documentation is critical to help defend the company against claims like we saw in the Horn versus Medical Marijuana Inc. case, where plaintiffs are claiming that they took a CBD product that turned up positive for THC. What plaintiffs in the Horn case and the Coy case did were they bought subsequent bottles of CBD, tested those, and those were turned up positive. There was no testing done on the actual CBD that the plaintiffs took. So with correct documentation in place and being able to track the exact batch that the plaintiff took, then companies can refer back to those test results and say, look, this is we suspect the plaintiff bought CBD oil from this batch. Here is the testing analysis for this batch. It did not contain THC or did not contain anything else that they're claiming it contains. So it's important to have these types of documentation in place to protect companies later on and against potential litigation.
And from what we've seen, listen, it's not unusual for these tests to come back. They're paper, they're put in a folder or a document, and then having a supplier list on a spreadsheet, and it gets convoluted and kind of crazy fast. And so especially where a lot of companies lose visibility is through that, what we call transactions that occur. Of course, you're going to have receiving shipments and tracking lot numbers, and you're going to ship it out. But oftentimes, if there's some sort of manufacturing or what I call transformation of a product, you're going to blend products. That's where visibility gets lost, and saying, hey, we had a lot number coming in. Well, what happened to that? If there's, in essence, that's what leads to the need for a recall and return systems, which we've built in as well. And what I was surprised too coming into the industry is that even large dietary supplement or food companies don't necessarily have recall and return systems in place or technology. It's, hey, this supplier says this lot number's bad. Can you guys run through the files and see where this ended up? And then let's just recall everything back in place. So what TagOne wants to do is make that process surgical. And I'll show you guys in a second a visual map that can show you how that can happen fast, efficient, saving time, money. I mean, there's one Deloitte report that says a recall and return can cost a company up to $10 million. And that's certainly we want to help people avoid. But I mean, I know you don't work on the technology side, but Neil, on the as far as process or procedure, what do you guys advise companies to have in place when it comes to recalls and returns?
We advise them to have a comprehensive policy in place. Not only is it better for the consumer that way, but they've got to have it to comply. And insurance companies that insure CBD and hemp products, that's one of the first questions on their application. Do you have a recall procedure in place? That tends to make your insurance lower. So you're saving money on your insurance if you have something in place. So it's something that we tell our clients is an absolute must, especially new operators in the industry.
So as our clients are putting in their core data, their suppliers, lot numbers, ultimately what we get to is a visual. We talk about our visual supply chain, right? Our visual map, which now, I mean, historically, if everything is in different spreadsheets, now what we give our clients the ability to do is, hey, click on a product, and now you can see who your suppliers are, who your suppliers are, what are the lot numbers associated with those, when did you receive them, and what locations did you receive them from, which are core aspects of any sort of audit or civil risk. Like, when you see this, how can this help a company from reducing the risk to have this level of detail in their supply chain?
It expedites the process of recalls, one, but also it helps them prove where things came from. Whenever they get in any type of legal water, whether it's legal hot water, whether it's by regulators or a civil lawsuit, they've got documents in place at the ready to show and hopefully disprove claims to show that this product is compliant. My manufacturer is compliant. Here's documentation to show that here it is. And it's no longer looking through folders that are buried under God knows what to try and find documentation. You have everything at the ready to show it to those people who need to see it.
And I think that's where we want to take, by using platforms like TagOne and using blockchain, we want to get beyond, say, I told you so, and this is our promise, to provenance. Like, how can we leverage technology to validate that what we're saying is actually true? And then ultimately, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but what we want to provide our customers, and if you guys are out there, insurance providers or other attorneys that have customers that could use this, is how can we leverage analytics to make decisions? How can we be more agile? How do we know what's in our inventory? And to make things like audits, which are typically pretty painful, a lot less painful. And so we've got a whole dashboard that can provide the executives and the QC and the logistics team with supply chain management team with the information they need. So real quick, next poll we're going to go to, which is, how would you evaluate your current supply chain process? Like, 1, like, man, we're just getting started. It's a little bit messy. We're still trying to figure things out. Or 5, like, man, we are in great shape. We know exactly what we're doing. We're rocking and rolling, and we don't have any concerns. If you're a service provider, just maybe pick one of your largest clients or maybe what the average of your clients is and kind of evaluate on where you think they are at this time. We'll give that a moment to come back. And so real quick, how is a good supply chain going to impact your business? 1, insurance premiums. I put question marks there because honestly, we don't know. I know we've got some insurance specialists on the call today, and maybe we can do a webinar with one to talk about the impact. But is having a good supply chain, because it's reducing risk, an area that can reduce insurance premiums? Maybe. Simplified audits, for sure. Like, having everything in one centralized system just makes life a whole lot easier. Something that a lot of people don't think about, I've been an entrepreneur for a while, is, hey, how do you get diligence ready? If you need to raise capital, if you are going to acquire another company or get acquired, how can having a good, clean supply chain make life a whole lot easier for you? How do you build trust with buyers? When you go to somebody, say, hey, buy my product, my ingredient, and there's competition, well, let me show you my supply chain system to build that trust with them, to get a premium. And there are some studies that say you can get a premium for your product as you build trust with people. Streamlining operations, make sure the new employees come in, they know exactly what they need to do. Operational agility. And then, as we talked about today, how do we reduce risk? So, by the way, it came in right around 3 stars before, with but most people feel like they're kind of right in the middle when it comes to their supply chain sophistication level, which kind of makes sense. So, kind of the next question we're going to start now, which is, do you think there's a need in this industry for track and trace or seed to shelf system? And kind of say, like, what's your need? And trying to get a sense of, is this something that people need in the hemp CBD space today? Is it a high priority? And how do we move forward with that? Now, obviously, I'll get to our solution at the end if we're able to help anybody at this point in time. So now this poll is still running. It looks like most people have a need. Close to 60% say it's a pretty high priority. Another 13% say they may want something within the next year, which is good to see. So now let's get to some questions. Neil, are you good if we take this a little bit beyond an hour to answer a couple more questions
Yeah,
on this?
absolutely. That's not a problem.
Cool. All right, so if you guys want to keep answering that, you're welcome to. So I'm just going to, like I said, I'm not going to be able to get to all these, but I'll do my best. So one question is, are the C of A's on TagOne available to consumers? Dana, good question. Yes and no, right? We allow our clients to disclose what you want to disclose. So with TagOne Connect, that mobile app, that can be automated. So if there's a C of A, it can be automatically viewed and associated with that product. So that's something that we can build in for you. Let's see. Somebody had a question earlier, like, how do you differentiate the impact? I know I asked this to you yesterday, so it's a common question, between USDA and FDA. Where does their authority like divide or maybe overlap, Neil?
Sure. So the USDA is tasked with overseeing the growing of hemp. That's it. The FDA's jurisdiction comes in when extract from hemp is put into the food supply or drugs. So the FDA doesn't really distinguish between hemp or marijuana. They're just concerned when CBD is put into a food product impermissibly or marketed as a drug when in fact it hasn't gone through the FDA approval process.
Thank you for providing that. So here's a science question. I certainly don't know this. Maybe you may, from Angela, which is in the 2018 definition of 0.3%, or is the 2018 definition of 0.3% decarboxylated or just the delta 9? Also, once concentrated into an oil, then what are the rules once it's put into an oil? Any idea on that one, Neil?
I don't know about the technical question. No, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't, to be frank.
Me neither. Angela, we'll see if we can find somebody who can answer that for you. And so what do you view, and granted, I know that you can't look into a crystal ball, but what do you think are the most likely pathways, Greg asked, for federal legalization? Is it best case 2 to 3 years, 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and how do we get there?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. The FDA is going to be updating the public about the progress for legal pathways for CBD products this month. So we're expecting some good movement. One of the things that I think a lot of other industry members think is to create a dual pathway approach where hemp extracts, full spectrum hemp extracts will be permissible and can be added to foods and beverages and marketed as dietary supplements. But CBD isolate or pure CBD products will be impermissible because that's the active ingredient in an FDA-approved drug, Epidiolex. There's some case law authority for that logic. The outgoing former commissioner of the FDA, Scott Gottlieb, has hinted at that. He had an op-ed piece in the Washington Post yesterday or the day before, talking about potential pathways. Part of the FDCA. There's an exception to the new drug exclusion rule that permits the Secretary of the FDA to essentially legalize an article that has been that's in an FDA-approved drug and permit that to be added to food and beverages. So that's another approach that the FDA could take that would be much quicker than the 2 to 3 year regulatory process. There's been a ton of congressional pressure. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon has been a huge proponent for the CBD industry, and a month ago wrote a letter to the FDA, pretty much telling them to act quickly. I know Senator Mitch McConnell has had discussions with the acting commissioner of the FDA, Ned Sharpless. So there's been a ton of congressional pressure to move quickly. I don't know if it's going to be a 6-month process or a 2 to 3 or 5 year process, but I think the FDA understands the urgency, given that it is a $1 billion industry. There's a ton of consumer demand. Products are already out there, and they've got to kind of wrangle it in.
Interesting. Yeah, I appreciate that insight. So another question: how about using CBD in cosmetic products and being listed in ingredients list? Is there what are some of the something that's topical and not injectable, does it change at all, or is that under the same level of scrutiny?
Yeah, so the FDA had been largely silent on cosmetics for a while, but in I think their March their March update to their FAQ, they specifically commented on cosmetics, and they didn't necessarily give a green light for cosmetics, but they gave a greenish yellow light for cosmetics. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I can pull up the language. They stated that the cannabis or cannabis-derived ingredients are not necessarily prohibited ingredients in cosmetic products, and they affirmed that these ingredients are not specifically addressed by regulation. However, the FDA warned that no ingredient, including cannabis-derived ingredients, can be used in a cosmetic if it causes the product to be altered or misbranded. Mm-hmm. So long as products, cosmetics are altered or misbranded, if they're advertised as a drug. So mm-hmm. It's less risky to have a CBD-based cosmetic product if you don't advertise it as to help with your chronic pain or to help with muscle aches. Once you start making those types of claims that affect the body or structure, then the FDA considers that a drug, and you're now impermissibly selling and marketing an unapproved drug. So it's a fine line, but it seems to be one of the least risky approaches when selling a CBD product, is to sell cosmetics.
Here's what I want to do. I'm going to conclude this, but come back to Q&A because I know we're after 2 o'clock and there's people who have to get to work here. But if you guys want to hang out for a little bit and just listen to a couple more Q&As, we're happy to do that. So real quick. So for anybody that is interested in learning more about TagOne, email me. Also, we're accepting 5 additional pilot partners in the sector by October. If this is something you're interested in doing, say, hey, listen, we think we could want to use our platform in order to develop that seed to shelf transparency and step up your integrated supply chain, please send me an email. Pilot partners basically include, obviously our full platform, integration, advising, feedback on the product, and an opportunity to help shape the product. We want to do joint case studies and, of course, discounts on the platform too. So send me an email. And then also, if you're thinking about doing this, but you're not quite sure, if you're ready, when you'll be ready, or what you need to do to get ready, we do have an advisory team that's been doing this for a long time. Same thing, send me an email and say, hey, can you provide a team that can do a roadmap for us and help us get ready for integrating technologies and helping to step up our product transparency. So here's some contact information. I'll leave this up here in the meantime while we're answering more questions. You can get in touch with Neil. Neil is graciously offered to answer more questions and feedback for you. You can send him an email. And of course, here's my contact information. My direct information is down below, my mobile and our office numbers up above. Feel free to reach us out if you have more questions. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And in the meantime, we'll answer some more questions if anybody would like to listen a little bit further. So somebody asked a question on THC. This said, I guess maybe they saw something online that THC was making claims. Is it fair to say that THC can't make any more claims than CBD can? Like they fall under the same regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the FDA, in their FAQs and a lot of their warning letters, have mentioned THC as well. But the reason why FDA has not gone after companies who sell THC products in a state-regulated system, one is because those products stay within the state. They're completely intrastate. It is illegal to sell those products across state borders, and the FDA's jurisdiction comes into play once products move across state borders. So because medical marijuana products that contain THC are not going across state borders, the FDA has taken a hands-off approach. But also there's been every year to the federal budget, there's been an amendment to the budget that says the DOJ cannot expend any funds to go after medical marijuana companies operating in compliance with state law. So the FDA, when taking any type of enforcement action, has to rely on the Department of Justice to actually take the enforcement action. So they've been the DOJ has been prohibited from spending any money doing that. So that's another reason why you haven't seen similar types of enforcement actions against marijuana companies. Now, I think one of the elephants in the room that a lot of people, I think a lot of MSOs especially, acknowledge but aren't really talking about is Well, what happens when THC and marijuana becomes legal on a federal level, and THC starts to be to move across state lines? Is the FDA going to take a similar approach to THC as they are with CBD? THC, or at least a synthetic version of THC, is an active ingredient in an approved FDA drug, Marinol. So the same analysis from the FDA's perspective should apply to THC as it does to CBD. So the next 5 years, if THC becomes legal, marijuana becomes legal and starts being shipped across state lines, then we could potentially